All right, click the links to join the channel here over at SubScribeStar. So actually, I think I'm not going to use her name in the thumbnail or the title because the more I read about her, she seems to be legitimately mentally ill. So whose idea was it to have a black character run around Japan wiping out the Japanese? Like, isn't there anyone in the room who's able to bring up current affairs, so to speak, and go, this is probably not the time for this kind of diversity? And like, are they really that far in an echo chamber where they have no idea what the greater world holds? So I was reading this Kotaku article by our girl smirking. Like, I'm sure she feels that she's like the smartest person in the room, where the left wing frames and labels things in this case as hate, but they do this thing where they don't present an argument, they just present a conclusion, and then they conclude with a conclusion. And to be fair, they did just have their Australian branch, I guess, shut its doors. I don't know why Australia would be so different from the local branch. But the left wing frames things as hate, or a bunch of other hot words they use. The globalist universities and media create these new usages of old words so they can manipulate the readers of the article. They present the conclusion in the title, calling things hate or toxic, or they use as many buzzwords as they can, but only against the right wing or people of European descent or Christian or men in general. And they never call the alt left or the communist left or the Bolsheviks, and they never look into any history of that. And you look at it, because you're literally bloodthirsty communists. So what they do is they do this so they can manipulate the readers, and they use these hot words, but at no point do they ever attempt to define the elements, because then somebody could logically just offer a vigorous rebuttal and cross-examination, and the left wing doesn't have the better argument. That's why they have to censor and deplatform. So they do this, unfortunately, in the New York Times, as well as Newsweek and all those other kind of mainstream articles, where the level of writing in Times and Newsweek, Wall Street Journal, and Kotaku and IGN are actually getting closer and closer. The vocabulary and syntax have decreased every year for decades. You'd have to have some language expert analyze the decline. I was just reading some of those mainstream articles about the VDARE situation, and then I noticed as I go back and forth to these Kotaku articles, they're really not that far apart in what feels like level of education or what audience they're writing towards. The university IQ has dropped steadily since the 60s and 70s. It's just a straight line down. It's actually pretty depressing. And the writers that graduated from these schools, well, they followed suit. And the left-wing writers were always, of course, biased. But they used to, at one time, be educated at a time when education actually meant something. The sciences have always been something concrete. Either you kind of know your chemistry or you don't. But at one time, the humanities from which these people are graduating from, or sometimes even journalist degrees or whatnot, at one time they were still respectable. If someone had a master's in English literature, they were going to be noticeably bright. And that's just not true anymore. And that hasn't been true in, I don't know, over 50 years, unfortunately. And I wish someone would do an analysis of USSC justices' opinions and the level of writing and the vocabulary and the decline over the years, because that was one place that you were always objectively going to get a really high level of discourse, argument, and vocabulary. I don't think there was ever going to be anything at a higher level of writing, and it would be interesting to see how that has also declined over the years. The country's getting stupid. So now mainstream media writing is laughably biased because it's written by objectively low IQ people who have degrees that are also meaningless and worthless. That's kind of its own video about the getting everyone to go to college. It's like, well, the average IQ at college 50 years ago was like, I don't know, like 120 or 30 or something. It was respectably high, and you look at it now, it's like, oh, it's just the national average. It's just everyone is going and getting a history degree, and it's, almost meaningless. Diploma mills. So it's kind of depressing to read what used to be respected media, and it's written now at a child's level. And I mean that you can go through all the mainstream company media publications, and it's more true than not. Every once in a while there'll be someone who's holding out, but there's a lot of stuff that is written for like at a grammar school level, and that's in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal type of stuff, because the writers are dumb now, but also because the audience is dumber. Or if you want to occasionally find high quality writing, you got to go to the far right alternative media, which I think the SPLC or ADLU or ADL just put the VDARE out of business using an endless lawfare that they don't have the money to litigate. They needed them to subpoena these documents, and like VDARE is a small company, it's making like $1 million a year or less, and so they just don't have people. They can't just hire people to go through and redact information in the documents for a subpoena. And so the judge was issue them a fine of like $250 a day, and it's like, well, that plus attorney's fees. It's like that's what lawfare is. You just can't fight against a legal system that is very much biased against free speech websites. Anyway, so the guy involved in this thing who wrote the so like even this is a great quote, because they argue as if they're college professors, which nowadays doesn't mean anything unless it's like you've got a math professorship, but they don't define anything. And they build these logical arguments on a sand foundation, and all it takes is to just blow it away is by asking them some questions, but they won't answer questions. They'll just block you on social media. So they go, Isnophobicism isn't a logical position, so you can't defeat it with logic, but you haven't defined it. Facts just don't matter. And okay, so it turns around and we go, so you feel this way for anti-white racism as well. And then suddenly they start backpedaling and trying to redefine words to not include you. It's like, well, isn't that dehumanizing and degrading an entire group of people? Isn't that kind of the definition of Isophobicism? And then they start backpedaling again to just try to drag you down, and then eventually they just block you because they don't have the winning argument pretty much any time. Anyway, so the guy who was involved in this video game thing, what he did was he wrote a Wikipedia page, and it had like a grain of truth to it about this. There was a black retainer, and what exactly he was, who knows. But he fabricated the entire story from there, and then later he wrote a book based on the nonsense article that he wrote in Wikipedia. This is I don't know what to call it. It's like this circular foundation building that mainstream media uses now, where they source things from biased sources or from rumors or from their own people, and none of it is research because everything has to be clickbait now. And when you start tracking things down, that's how you're getting defamation suits and tortious interference type of suits, because the media is just not the media anymore. The media hasn't been the media in like over 20 years. So one of the characters in the game is a samurai, which makes sense, but unfortunately he is a sub-Saharan character, which probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense because there's just not enough evidence to say. But the Japanese consensus seems to be is that he was probably an unusual retainer, but they say that what it was, a samurai retainer, can kind of be somewhat of a spectrum. And just because we're on the right, we don't want to take an opposing viewpoint. If we don't know, we don't know. And if it was true, it'd be unusual enough that you could put it in the story. But the problem is there's a culture war going on. The globalists are destroying Japan just like they're destroying the West, and the Japanese are starting to notice. So that means, we're going to have to accelerate the destruction of the Japanese. We've had so much ridiculous levels of race swapping that if people see it, the assumption is that it's just more globalist cancer, and most of the time they're right. And even if it was historically accurate, people are just done with all this kind of stuff. And if you're not up to date on this thing, the globalists use the sub-Saharans to replace everyone. It's overwhelmingly the group most picked, and even Elon Musk retweeted an image of about 50 characters that were red or blonde that had been swapped for black characters, mostly by Disney and other comic book companies and whatnot. And it's absurd. People will show the charts of these kind of replacements, and almost all the time it's red or blonde and replaced with specifically black African characters. And the movies, games, and stories just don't sell as well as they used to, but that doesn't stop them because to them, it's a religion. But now the Japanese are saying this is effing ridiculous, or like I want to do a Japanese accent, but I don't think YouTube is cool with that. YouTube used to be cool with all that kind of stuff. They don't believe that the character was a samurai. Whether he was or not, the perception is he was not. So in Japan, they're making enough of a complaint that the video game company, I mean, wouldn't it just be hysterical to throw in some Japanese pronunciations, like stereotypical ones? But YouTube has no chill. So the video game company had to come out and try to explain the situation, which obviously is impossible. And the whole time, the Alyssa Mercante types have been laying all the blame on people who look like you and me for some reason, the beautiful blonde people. And I don't even care anymore about this story. I thought this story kind of died down. There's just so much just crap out there, so many things going on. Is that I look at this, go, okay, just don't buy the game, move on. I mean, but I look at that with everything now. Like I'm tempted to just jump to the conclusion with all of mainstream media, comics, video games, whatever you're into, and go, you don't have to buy any of it. Like you can literally just like draw a line in the sand. You go, oh, this is my last date. Today was the last day I will participate in mainstream consumerism for this kind of stuff. I don't need it. I don't need to buy it. I don't need it. You can. There's old books and games and comics and movies. I mean, there's so much stuff out there. Eventually, like it sounds crazy if you're not at that point yet, but eventually you'll hit a point. You look at the mainstream, you're like, oh, there's probably never going to be a movie that comes out anymore that's worth watching. That means it doesn't have some kind of a globalist propaganda to it. And if you think a movie, like there's people are just not that far down the rabbit hole yet. They think movies are, oh, this movie was good, and then I can point out like, well, here's the propaganda to it. And once you see it, it kind of ruins movies for you. So if you really just want to stay a normie, then just don't start looking for it, because once you do, you'll look at movies you thought were cool and you're like, oh, they're laughing at us. They're not laughing with us, including movies like Blazing Saddles, Revenge of the Nerds, Pulp Fiction, Fight Club. There's so many little scenes in these movies where you watch it and it changes the way you look at the world, which is good because it's better to be very much awake and out of the matrix. Where's I going with this? Anyway, they hate us, the fair, light-eyed type of folks. And so the whole time she's been blaming us, and move on. But Japan kind of got fired up about this kind of stuff, or maybe it just hit Japan when they started to see what was going on, and they're making petitions to get it banned. And the Alyssa Mercante types are frothing at the mouth because she doesn't know who to blame. And the core issue is how much these useful Frankfurt School idiots have to just, they just hate European people. Where even the situation is such that the Japanese people are upset about a black character, that just causes their brain to go into blue screen of death, and they still have to find a way to blame you. And I think that Grums guy, I don't know, I think he's part Asian or something. So, she doesn't know who to blame. So these leftists have a situation that is getting worse for them, because a situation like this, where the Japanese are getting pissed, and yeah, I wrote it out. I didn't use a shorthand. The liberals don't know what to do, so they take a legitimate grievance of that group being upset, and since it's against a group, the blacks who are at the top of the Frankfurt School manipulation hierarchy, well, they're forced to call the Japanese racist, which they can't define. I did a SS video on the a SubScribestar video on the guy who said the map is not the territory. If you just punch that in a search engine, that guy's history will come up. Really interesting, because the concept of these globalist media and university manipulation words, all those istophobic words, how they're used is not just the creation of them, but how they have changed people's understanding of them is fascinating, because they're not organic words that refer to things or concepts. They're one of the ways that the Bolsheviks manipulate people who have already been brainwashed via decades of media to accept it. So I'm doing a little construction. So in Pavlovian fashion, it's a stimulus response where you've got the dumbest people on earth and the most evil, manipulative people who are manipulating society into the ground, because this glamour has been cast over society. And if you want to know how far we are into this situation, the dictionaries, there's some mainstream name of a dictionary. they now include a circular definition in some of their online definitions for man and woman. That's illogical. That's not how etymology works. Yeah, and they included it anyway because they were scared. Or a Supreme Court justice doesn't know the definition of woman. Anyway, while Americans are terrified, justifiably, of being lynched by a social justice mob or even literally having their house burned down or something, once you're labeled an Istophobic wrong thinker, the Japanese are not. The concept doesn't exist to them in the way that it does to low IQ American mobs. And low IQ because we're being made stupid, and the fat, lazy American cattle debt slaves that allow it. The insults are deserved because we, us, could stop all this almost overnight if we could find our balls, turn off the TV, video games, sports ball, and prawn and started organizing. But that's what bread and circuses are for, to placate people until it's too late and then slaughter them. The thing is, we're dealing with literal communist parasites. They might be idiots, but the puppet masters manipulating them are far from stupid. And if my videos seem weird, it's because these people are responsible for 3 a.m. knocks on the door, brutal human rights violations, and well-fertilized fields. And if you're old enough, and if you're from Eastern Europe, you know this at a different level than people who are not. Communism doesn't go away. It's a cycle, and it's on its upward swing now. And the odds are they're going to win because technology has made it possible for that rule, the adage of fat men don't revolt, to be true. You can use modern farming techniques to just keep so much food flowing at a low enough price that you can keep people obese. So logically, they might know that something's wrong, but they're not hungry yet, and they have prawn, video games, and sports ball to watch. And people like Alyssa Mercante are sociopaths, and that she has a following is a sign of how deep into Weimar we are. The Japanese are still a people, a nation, Natal. The globalists haven't destroyed it yet, so when they see a black samurai, they tell the company to go eat a dick, and the American SJWs call them phobic, but the Japanese don't care. America's not a nation anymore. It's a commercial zone. There's no identity, no religion, no belief. Anyone can be American. It's just a piece of paper. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't always like this. It wasn't intended to be like this, and parts of it could be saved if people cared. But right now, it's just an economic zone controlled by bankers and NGOs. So it can be manipulated by a toxic media, the alt-left media, that they never call themselves alt-left, or they never report on a media bias in their sister companies for some reason. The media has in-group preferences, and they're on the same page, or at least they're getting the marching orders from the same half dozen people that control discourse. And nobody thinks it's odd that the media is 100% a globalist entity that's pushing one narrative. There is no mainstream nationalist dissenting media. Zero. The media doesn't report the news. They make it and they shape it to manipulate politics. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next episode.